Senator Lankford.
Thank you, Senator. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here, and thanks for the engagement on this. Let me just go through a couple of questions quickly on it. There's a lot of conversation about the RAC audit process. That's not a new conversation to you at all. In your testimony, you also even note that starting in 2009, there's a 1,300% increase in Medicare in the auditing and what's happening in the appeals process. There's obviously a problem that has happened. So while you're accelerating the appeals process on this, I'd like to get down to some of the root causes. There have been multiple changes to the RAC audit process. What is pending right now to continue to reform the RAC audit process in the days ahead, beyond just the appeals process, which we can talk about separately, but the root cause of this?
So with regard to the RAC process, I think it's important to kind of step back. What RACs were put in place to do was to work on program integrity issues in terms of Medicare spending. Right. This is something that Dr. Coburn and others helped us focus on. And this was put in place so that we could do the tracking. It has tracked many, and returned quite a bit of money to the federal treasury in the billions of dollars in terms of what goes back in the trust fund. There were negative unintended consequences that occurred. The Congress has put a hold on certain parts of the RAC process. Administratively, we have taken steps to change the RAC process.
So what is, and y'all have made some changes, what I was trying to get at, what's next?
Well,
what are the changes that are pending still?
There are constraints that have been put on by the Congress in terms of us and our ability to go forward with RACs. That's something we want to do. There's also contracting. We've had challenges to the contracting. So we need to get through those challenges and go through the regular process. We need to get the RACs back up and running, and we need to put in place and be able to implement the administrative changes. Changes like if it is not resolved within 90 days, we have these changes, we've done them administratively, but we're not being able to act on them as fully as we'd like because the process is not up and running. It's only on Part D. There's only a very small part that we're doing it. The other thing is it actually does interact. So there are a number of changes. If the RAC case does not go forward and isn't successful, there will be nothing paid. And so we've tried to fix some of the incentive issues that were causing problems. It is related to the backlog issue, and the place where we believe we need some help from the Congress and have had these conversations across a number of committees are in that backlog process.
So the recovery audit data warehouse, putting that in place to make sure you don't have duplication of contracting and such that's happening, and your contractors doing multiple claims. Last year, there was a statement that came out to say that is in process of trying to reform that to make sure the contractors actually multiply. Do you know if there's been any progress?
That one is one I'll have to get back to you
on. Okay, that's one I know that's pending. Dealing with good providers, if a good provider,
yes,
obviously they don't need to have this continual RAC process coming through them as frequent, or at least have a smaller number pulled. Any kind of consequence for any contractor that's pulling a lot of files that are being overturned. So on both sides of this, there's an incentive for the contractors to also be good.
And the providers,
the way they do it, and the providers to also.
Yes. And the provider review is something that we have put in place in these administrative changes.
Okay. Let me ask about another issue that's not near as contentious as RAC audits. It's been very smooth in the process. Is ICD-10 and the transition to that. So let's do something simple as well. This process transition, everyone's concerned about it. Obviously, y'all have dealt with it for a long time and trying to work towards that transition. A lot of conversation about the advance payments, what happens in the transition, how many small providers will be vulnerable during that time period. It's the same issue with the RACs. The RACs can be managed by large providers, by small providers. It's very, very difficult for them to have large files that are pulled. The concern is out there as well for ICD-10, what happens in the transition there, the in-between. The discussion has been out there on advance payments. Is there a policy that's in place? Is there a process? Are there details coming out? How they'll be handled, or is that still being considered?
With regard, we now plan to go forward in October. I think you probably know there was a delay that was legislated, but right now the plan is to go forward this October in terms of moving to ICD-10. As part of that process, we have been doing testing and communication with large players and small players. Most of the large players have been ready and are ready. The question of any type of delay has to do with both cost as well as the question of fairness and equity for those who are prepared to make the switch. The hospital associations have done surveys, and we have very high percentages of people reporting that they are ready. For any of those that aren't, we are still in the process of anyone. We will provide the technical assistance. We will go in to try and do the training.
What about the advanced payments side of it? Is that still being discussed to be able to help some of those individuals that are in the process? The concern is there's not going to be a smooth transition from one to the other. Is it your confidence that there will be a very smooth transition, that there's not going to be a gap for the small providers?
the numbers that we're hearing and what we're hearing in response is indicating that they are ready and that there's only a very small group that is not ready. But during the period from now until October, we want to continue to work and find from those groups. If you are hearing from those, it would be helpful to us.
Well, I think it's just important for us to know you're confident that there's not going to be a gap in payments that are going to further expose some of these smaller providers.
We are
when that
planning to
transition-
make sure that we can go through and that people will be ready so that there won't be those kinds of problems.